Here's a question that trips up almost everyone new to cloud computing. If there's a security breach in my cloud environment, whose fault is it? Mine or the cloud provider's? The answer is, it depends. And that it depends is the entire point of the shared responsibility model, one of the most fundamental concepts in cloud computing that you absolutely must understand before you deploy anything to the cloud. We've covered provider responsibilities and consumer responsibilities in our previous videos. Now let's put it all together and understand how this shared model actually works, why it exists, and most importantly, how to use it to keep your cloud environment secure. Let's break it down. The shared responsibility model is a framework that defines the security and operational responsibilities between cloud service providers and their customers. It's a clear division of labor. The provider secures the cloud infrastructure, and you secure what you put in the cloud. Think of it as a stack. At the bottom, you have physical infrastructure, data centers, servers, networking hardware. As you move up, you have virtualization, operating systems, middleware, applications, and finally, your data at the top. The shared responsibility model draws a line through this stack. Everything below the line is the provider's responsibility. Everything above the line is yours. But here's the critical part. Where that line is drawn depends entirely on what type of cloud service you're using. This isn't the provider trying to avoid responsibility, it's actually a logical division based on control. The provider manages what they control directly, the physical infrastructure and the platforms they build. You manage what only you can control, your data, your users, your applications, and how you configure the services you're using. Understanding where that line is drawn for your specific services is the difference between secure cloud operations and catastrophic security failures. Let's visualize how responsibilities shift across different service models, because this is where most confusion happens. In infrastructure as a service, IaaS, like Amazon EC2 or Azure Virtual Machines, the line is drawn low in the stack. The provider handles the physical infrastructure, the virtualization layer, and the physical network. Everything from the guest operating system upward is your responsibility. You're managing the OS, installing patches, configuring firewalls, deploying applications, managing data, basically everything that makes the virtual machine useful. As you move to platform as a service, PaaS like AWS Elastic Beanstalk or Google App Engine, the line moves up. Now the provider also manages the operating system, the runtime environment, and middleware. Your responsibility is reduced to your application code, your data, and your configuration choices. You're not patching operating systems anymore. The provider handles that. But you're still responsible for writing secure code and managing your data properly. At the software as a service SaaS level, think Microsoft 365 or Salesforce, the line is drawn very high. The provider manages almost everything: the infrastructure, the platform, the application itself. Your responsibility is primarily about configuration, access management, and the data you put into the application. You're not managing servers or applications, you're just using a fully managed service. Here's the pattern. As you move from IaaS to PaaS to SaaS, the provider takes on more responsibility and your operational burden decreases. But, and this is crucial, your responsibility for data security, access control, and proper configuration never goes away, regardless of the service model. Now let's address a common misconception. Shared responsibility doesn't mean both parties are responsible for the same things. It means you each have distinct, non-overlapping responsibilities that work together. Take encryption as an example. In most cloud services, the provider is responsible for offering encryption capabilities. They build the encryption features into their platform. But you're responsible for deciding whether to enable encryption, what to encrypt, and managing the encryption keys. Shared doesn't mean joint, it means complementary. Or consider network security. The provider is responsible for the security of the physical network infrastructure. You're responsible for configuring virtual networks, security groups, and firewall rules. The provider gives you the tools, you use them correctly. Authentication is another example. The provider maintains the authentication systems and ensures they're secure and available. You're responsible for enforcing strong authentication policies, implementing multi-factor authentication, and managing who has access to what. Here's the key insight. The provider is responsible for the security of the cloud, the infrastructure itself. You're responsible for security in the cloud, how you use that infrastructure. When both sides fulfill their responsibilities, you get secure cloud operations. When either side fails, you get breaches, outages, and problems. Let's talk about where the shared responsibility model breaks down in practice, because understanding failures helps you avoid them. The most common mistake is assuming the provider is responsible for more than they actually are. Organizations move to the cloud and think, great, security is now Amazon's problem. No. Amazon secures the infrastructure, your application security, your data protection, your access controls, still your problem. Public S3 buckets are the classic example. AWS provides the tools to control bucket permissions. If you configure a bucket as publicly readable and expose sensitive data, that's not AWS's fault. You had the controls, you misconfigured them. That's a customer responsibility failure. Another common issue is not understanding how responsibility shifts between services. An organization might correctly manage their EC2 instances, patching the OS and securing the network. Then they start using Lambda, a PaaS offering, and assume the same level of management is required. It's not. The provider handles more. But they still need to secure their function code and manage IAM permissions. The responsibilities shifted, and they didn't adapt. Compliance failures are frequent too. The provider can achieve HIPAA or PCI DSS certification for their infrastructure, but that doesn't automatically make your use of their services compliant. You still need to configure encryption, implement access controls, enable logging, and maintain your own compliance program. The provider gave you compliant infrastructure. Using it compliantly is your responsibility. So how do you effectively operate within the shared responsibility model? First, know your service models. For every cloud service you use, understand whether it's IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS, and what that means for your responsibilities. Major cloud providers publish detailed shared responsibility matrices. Read them. Second, document the boundary. For your organization, explicitly document who is responsible for what. Don't assume everyone understands the model. Make it clear. Third, implement controls for your side of the responsibility. The provider handles infrastructure security, but you need to implement application security, data protection, identity and access management, and monitoring for your resources. Fourth, leverage provider tools, but don't depend solely on them. Providers offer security services, monitoring and compliance tools. Use them, but also implement your own additional controls. Defense in depth applies even in the cloud. And finally, assume the provider is doing their job, but verify when possible. Review their compliance reports, understand their security practices, and hold them accountable to their SLAs and commitments. The shared responsibility model is the foundation of cloud security. It's a partnership where the provider secures the infrastructure and you secure what you build on it. Understanding this model isn't optional. It's fundamental to successful cloud adoption. The provider will do their part. The question is, will you do yours? If this helped clarify the shared responsibility model, subscribe for more cloud fundamentals. Comment with your questions about cloud responsibilities. And remember, in the cloud, security is always shared, but your responsibilities are always yours. See you in the next one.